Hi, I'm Johanna Weaver, and you're listening to Tech Mirror. All right, folks, my guest today is Associate Professor Dr. Catherine Ball. She is a scientific futurist, a speaker, an advisor, an author, a founder, a company director, and a cover girl on the latest edition of Company Director, which is particularly spectacular. We're going to talk today about Catherine's book, which I have here in my hand, called Converge. And the tagline of the book is A Futurist's Insight into the Potential of Our World as Technology and Humanity Collide. Kath, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. People won't know, but we've had some pre-chat that is really quite funny. So
it's a good basis for us to start.
It is.
Now, the first question is, what is a futurist and how do you become one? When you were a little kid, did you grow up going, I want to be a futurist when I grow up? It's a pretty impressive job title.
I actually wanted to be an astronaut, and I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I wanted to be a ballerina, all those things that 3-year-olds want to do. I think ultimately then I wanted to go into medicine, and I still wanted to be in environmental science. And I think one of the things that I've always cared about is what's coming next. So the word futurist can sound a bit, silly, but it can be summed up in a lot of different ways depending upon whom it is you're talking to. So if you're talking to someone in, say, Wall Street, they will call you someone like a global foresight, strategic foresight, predictive planning.
Sounds very
modeling,
weighty.
Modeling and prediction. And, so my PhD did involve a lot of modeling and prediction, but we were looking at how the microbes in the soil actually behave according to different fertilizer regimes. So, I was kind of predictive. And in fact, the word predictive statistics is in my PhD title. So, being able to prepare rather than react, I think, is something that I've always been frustrated by whenever we've seen anything go wrong globally. It's almost like, why didn't we know that was coming? We knew it was coming. We did nothing about it. And I think the lack of pandemic planning or the seeming lack of pandemic planning is something that I was, very rare that I scream at the television, but every now and then.
I do it all the time. I don't have a television in my house anymore because my husband confiscated it.
Well, that's another story. But yeah, so this idea of futurism really... I also don't want to sort of look at it like it's a thing that's over the horizon either, because the future is already here. And to quote William Gibson, and everyone will have heard this 1,000 times, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And if we're to break that down, it really does come down to the fundamentals that emerging and critical technologies that we are going to have in our lives in the next 10 or 15 years, they're already born. They're already here. But we have a gap between capability and action. And that gap between capability and action is where futurists sit, because we look at where the levers, we look at where the scalability issues, we look at where the standardization, we look at where the signals are switching on, switching off. We look at the world in a 4-dimensional Gaia, as Jim Lovelock came up with it, one living, breathing beast. How do these things balance? How do we engage ESG investing, for example? How do we look at new business models? QR codes are a great example of this. The people that invented QR codes 5 years ago had given up on them. They were an orphan technology. And how many of us have been exposed to or clicked on or looked at or seen QR codes in our lives in the last few years? I do believe people have even had QR codes tattooed on their bodies that when you click on them, take you to Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up on YouTube.
Oh, dear.
So, they have become ubiquitous in society. And once you hit the tattoo culture, I think you've really made it. So this idea of a futurist, it's a difficult word because it's an all-encompassing black box of lots of different kinds of people that like to model, predict, plan, control, scale. And then you've got people looking at it from an economic perspective, people looking at it from an ethical perspective, people looking at it from a technological perspective, and people looking at it from a social perspective. And that's why I find it, I think, to be so intriguing and where I'm putting my bet on my career for the next 10 years, because that is that accumulation of or that sort of places where collisions occur, that crucible of humans, technology and the environment are so beautifully summed up in the School of Cybernetics led by distinguished Professor Genevieve Bell. And that's why I've always been attracted to those conversations and what it could mean for us, not only as Australians, but also as women in Australia, and how we look to recognise our privilege and use that. I think a lot of futurists do come from a Western world that are quite well paid and that sit quite nicely in tech companies or banks. And I would actually like to talk to people that aren't in that position. And you'll find a lot of knowledge there around the prediction of how things will be outside of those traditional spaces. That's a very long answer to a very short and perfectly formed question. Thank you,
No, it's great. So you said there when you were a kid you wanted to be an astronaut, a ballerina, moved on to wanting to be a doctor. And I've seen you be described as the dame of drones. So can you just give us a potted history of your career path?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was Steve Jobs that said, you can only join the dots going backwards, right? I have pinball machined my way through my career path.
As so many people who have impressive careers have. It's really, and this is like a message for people listening.
Oh,
you don't have to have a strategic plan.
So I started once I finished my A-levels in the UK, which was when I was 17 going on 18, because I was the youngest in my year. So I was just 17 going on 18. And I decided that I wanted to go to Africa before I started university. So I did a gap year in Kitwe in the Copperbelt in Zambia, working with HIV/AIDS orphans in the late 90s, working with a group called Cindy Kitwe, where it was children in distress. And we were working with a grassroots organisation looking at how we provided stability for children inside their extended family groups as the HIV/AIDS pandemic absolutely destroyed and ravaged these countries. This is before the advent of, or the widespread use of proteases, for example. They actually came out in 1996, but a lot of the HIV medications didn't really hit scale globally until many years after that. And when we look now at, I get very emotional reading about the mRNA vaccine technology for HIV, which is one of the silver linings to come out of the pandemic, really, is synthetic biology. So after that, I was sort of thinking, should I do medicine? I had my place to do environmental protection. I went ahead and did it, and I chose a degree that purposefully had a year in industry because I really wanted to still travel. I didn't want to be one of these kids that, went to university, joined the rowing team, played a bit of tennis, had my nice little holiday to Australia. I was a working class kid. I was the first in my family to go to university. I remember turning up to the rowing team actually, and they were like, "Oh, how are you? And where does your daddy work? And which school did you go to?" And I was like, I cannot relate to any of you. Even though there's lots of tall boys here, I'm going to do 180 and I'm going to leave. So I didn't join the rowing club. So I was very upset about that. But it meant that their loss, of course. I could have been I could have had gold medals. All right. I could have been a championship rower. It's one of the parallel universes one of my multiverses that I have not achieved was my Olympic success. The pathway then took me to Thailand for my year in industry, and you've got to hold on with me here. So I went to Thailand under the late, great Keith Sayers' guidance, Professor Keith Sayers, and I went to Naresuan University in the centre of Thailand in a beautiful city called Phitsanulok. Pupasataigadai Bitileo Kadi Chimpentam, which I Timaha, which I Naresuan Phitsanulok Ka. And so I loved being illiterate. When I arrived in Thailand and I looked around me, I couldn't understand a freaking word they were saying, and I didn't understand the language. And of course, we're talking 2000, right? Yeah. So there was no YouTube for me to learn languages. There was no Duolingo for me to pick up languages on. So I tried to do stuff, but I had no idea what I was doing, and I just landed completely illiterate. And we were looking for new banana species, which might sound weird, but we wanted to register the genomes because biopiracy was a big thing back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And what you would find is countries like Thailand, the government was racing to register the genetic stock of their own flora and fauna before multinational companies would come in and register it. And it's ironic because we actually, having had that experience 20 odd years ago, we still have those problems in Australia now. Yeah. Like the Kakadu plum, I think, is registered in the US as a cosmeceutical, which means the Australian government or the Australian traditional owners of that don't own the genetic rights to it in the US. And, this was after the big push, the ideas boom, register all your businesses, show us all your, technology and stuff. And it wasn't protected by global trademarks. And so we were just vampired on by so many of these global companies, which is a real shame. So then I went on to do my undergraduate degree, environmental protection, like I said. I finished that up and I was considering doing a master's in new technology and Chinese, go to China, and then, or Mandarin rather, and go to China. And I also then got offered a PhD. The professor himself came into where I was working, stacking shampoo bottles in a place called Boots the Chemist that we have in the UK, in Alden Square in Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast of England. I remember it. And he came in and he handed me this paper and he said, "Would you like to do a PhD?" And I've never been one to look a gift horse in the mouth, but, we don't recognise poison chalices till we start drinking from them, do we? Nothing ever comes for free. And so I survived my PhD and I got my PhD. And then I started working in environmental consultancy, working with the Water Framework Directive in the EU. The global financial crisis came upon us. And again, I started looking, having not got a rich daddy in the city and not got a trust fund to fall back on, I was going to go bankrupt if I didn't move and work. And so I went to my company. I said, look at all these skills, look at all this global experience I have, find me something for me to apply for. And I think they had a hiring freeze, rather, there's my brain. They had a hiring freeze in the UK because a director was going or something like that. And I was like, this is awful. I'm sitting here with the dream life I want in London, just, in my late 20s, turning 30. I was like, this is where I want to be. And I wasn't going to be able to stay there. And it was devastating. Yeah. And I was like, well, you're on your own, kid. And here we go. And I got offered something in Austin, Texas or Perth, Western Australia to work on coral projects. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if I don't go to Australia now, then I never will. And I'll give it a couple of years and I'll put it on my CV and then I'll come back. So I was data manager on one of the world's largest marine monitoring programs, and I helped rejig a lot of the data management processes and shore up some of the statistics and worked with some amazing scientists on that project. Hopped around a few companies doing various work and started the drone business line at one of them. Then doing long-range drones, non-military drones, so reconnaissance drones, Australian-built drones, with an area approval that was like the size of the Pilbara. So, we're talking like 500-kilometre diameter area approval to fly these uncrewed vehicles. And we captured information in that first trial that David Attenborough would have given me his firstborn child. It was just perfect. It was Mother Nature without realizing we were there. And I know that with the drone stuff, a lot of people are like, oh, look at this picture of this eagle up close. And I'm like, no, that is non-predatory predation. You don't want animals interacting with your drone. How on earth are you allowing people to win photography competitions with these images that are so unethical? And anyway, so since then, I've been known as the Dame of Drones and have basically created World of Drones and Robotics Congress as my own business, worked directly with the industry to accelerate it to a business as usual proposition, and looked at the academic opportunities for that industry and partnership within that industry. Done a lot of speaking work along the way because I was Businesswoman of the Year back in 2015. And when you get given something like that, you have to own it and use it. Yeah. I've just kind of floated along, and in the last few years had a couple of kids. I've got 5 businesses that are now expanding globally. I've got my wonderful position here at ANU inside KEC, the College of Engineering, Computing and Cybernetics. I'm constantly trying to lighthouse people to get involved with the university and get industry partnerships involved with the university. And so I sit here on this beautiful sunny morning in Canberra thinking, blinking heck, it's been a while, really, since I sat and took stock of where it is that I've come from. So that's my pinball machine in brief.
Yeah, look, what an impressive pinball machine. And I think that the trajectory of coming through, especially being the first in a family to do this type of thing, and the isolation and the lack of networks that you have around you during that, it really can't be underestimated. And it's something that I think a lot of people still feel, and we don't actually talk about that a lot. And it's a really important piece of what shapes you and what you're doing. Let's move to talk about your book. I absolutely love it. Highly recommend it. And what I particularly like about the book is that there's a lot of depth to the book, but it's very easy to read. So it's the kind of thing that you can kind of give as a Christmas gift to someone who isn't somebody who is deep into tech, and they will enjoy it. And you can give it to someone who is focused on these issues, and they will also get something out of it. That's quite an achievement. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, there are 14 chapters in the book, and it covers, everything from digital doppelgangers to doppelgangers. That word is such a terrible word.
It's a terrible word. It's not English. It's all right.
The future of vacations, your 100th birthday party, climate change, the last atlas and the last athlete in the metaverse.
Yeah, that's particularly poignant at the moment.
Yeah. We're going to come to that in a bit. What I want to do, and this is going to be a challenge, Kath, but I reckon you can do it, is I'm going to do a quick fire round, 1 minute responses.
Okay, I can do that. Yeah. I can actually do 1 minute responses. Okay, we can do this.
Ready? All right, so we have 6 questions.
Okay, let's go.
What is your favorite chapter in the book and why? It's like asking you to choose your favorite child.
You're making me choose my favorite child because I should say the drones chapter, shouldn't I?
No, not at all.
But it's probably not actually. I think the one that was hardest for me to write was The War with No Dead. I almost pulled that chapter because it was so difficult.
That's my area of specialty.
Yes. So I almost want to ping pong that back at you and go, what did you think of how I tried to cover that material? Because people always talk about killer robots. When you start talking about robots or technology with people, because of the way the media has done this, because of the way our neurobiology works, humans are designed for fear, right? We're designed for negativity. We need to know where the risks are. And so negative clickbait wins. I refuse to allow this book to be a negative clickbait book. And I've probably not sold as many copies as I would have had if I'd had a, biohazard sign on the front and been like, warning, warning, technology's coming. I refuse to subscribe to that level of fear because I actually think there's power in how technology is going to work. And a friend of mine in the UK who works in PR, she said to me, look, the UK market is probably going to really struggle with this chapter. And I was like, give me the ping pong, let's play it. Tell me why. And she went, well, look at the Ukraine conflict. And I'm like, yeah, look at the Ukraine conflict. Look at what's just happened in the Ukraine conflict. Russia was using traditional methodology of dropping blokes out of planes. The Ukrainians were doing cyber warfare. The Ukrainians were flying drones. The Ukrainians were using drone boats to go and attack ships. So who was playing with which technology? And even now, the Russians are going with air attacks because they can't go in on the ground because guess what? Traditional ways of warfare don't work anymore. And the thing that I found most interesting about the Ukrainian conflict has been the use of social media and the use of information warfare. So that chapter for me, The War with No Dead, was the one that was the hardest for me to write, the one that I really wanted to pull. And I think because I had a really hard relationship with it. What does that say about me? Because I had a really hard relationship with that chapter and I hope to God that I'd done a good enough description of it for people. I think that means that's probably my favourite one. The hardest one was probably my favourite one.
All right. Well, that was going to be my next question, which was what was the hardest to write. So let's go to the next one, which is which chapter is the most urgent? Which is the one that you really, if people are going to read one chapter, and you should read the whole book, but if they were just going to read one chapter, which one?
Can I have two?
Sure.
Okay. So the very, very first one where I talk about machine drift and intentionality around technology.
Yeah.
Because we are all guilty of literally throwing hours of our lives and our retinas down the smart devices for tech billionaires.
Yeah.
And we have got to become more conscious consumers about how we use the internet. I feel like, people go, there's the power of landing on the moon in your smart device. I'm like, no, I could power a hospital with the computing power on my smart device. You've got to recognise we literally hold in our hands computing power that our grandparents never even physically saw in a room of computers. And so for me, that first one around, are you actually, you think therefore you are, or actually are you not yourself anymore because you are being guided all the time by algorithms that think they know what you want. And it's a scary prospect if we don't teach our kids around how to handle these kinds of algorithmic based interactions, that we will become mass zombies consuming content that the algorithm thinks that it wants us to consume. And the algorithms are written by people that don't look, sound or talk like us. And they're written in a way, or even become, self-generating with machine learning to sell you things. Surveillance capitalism is a huge red flag for me. The second chapter that I would say is everyone needs to pay attention to the climate change chapter.
Yeah.
So the roof is on fire. And I don't know if you got the quote, everyone sort of my age gets some of the quotes that I've got in there. So everyone knows that song, The Roof is on Fire. The roof is on fire.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't heard that from the 90s, then you need to go and look at, the 90s is very popular now, but I'm never going back to low-cut high-rise jeans, and I'm never doing heroin chic again because that's destroyed my upper arms for life now, that heroin chic stuff. But the idea that, we are literally watching it burn and we sit there and just continue on with our lives. And if we can't recognise some of the connections, swine flu, avian flu, SARS 1, SARS 2, we are going to start having pandemics, global pandemics that will shut us down on a regular basis. And we used to think it was a 1 in 100 year event. Then we realised it's a 1 in 20 year event. And now some of the people are predicting it's actually going to be an annual event. And if it becomes an annual event, how do we exist as the globalized society that we are? What do we give up if we want to keep our lives going? And how do we stay educated as society? And so for me, climate change is much more than, half of Australia's on fire. And let's just take a pause there for a moment. All the people that lost their lives, all the people that lost their houses, the intergenerational trauma that comes from huge events. We're still seeing the mental trauma and the post-traumatic stress from Black Saturday, which was how many years ago was Black Saturday fires now? Nearly 20 years, surely. We look at some of those things that are going to affect Australians going forwards. Then we look at the Pacific Islands, and we've got Tuvalu designing their metaverse because they know they're not going to exist in 50 years. Can we just look at some of the things that are actually already happening? Even in Australia, the Torres Strait is being absolutely battered by coastal erosion, such that they're losing their food producing areas, and they're losing areas of cultural significance like graveyards to the sea. And so we in Australia have always been called the canary in the coal mine. And those fires that we had in 2019, 2020, which we thought were going to be the worst thing to happen to us in 2020, we basically destroyed parts of the ozone layer and heated the stratosphere by 3 degrees. So, whenever I give international presentations, and you have to forgive me, maybe it's the British sense of humour, I've got to be a bit tongue-in-cheek, or maybe it's the larrikin Australian sense of humour, because I've been here 12 years now. I'm not sure who I am anymore in terms of nationalities. But, everyone always says, Australia, it's full of, the most deadly snakes and the deadliest spiders. I'm like, yeah, Australia's trying to kill you. And now we're trying to kill all of you because we've just heated up the stratosphere by 4 degrees. And, why is that not making the headlines? Like, why is that not red flag urgent? We have to do something about this. And so I think looking at how the technology, though, is working to try and find ways to enable people to understand things on a global scale, I feel like, especially the work that you do here as well, is incredibly important because people don't know what's already happening. And I end that chapter with a quote from Jill Hicks, who was a survivor of the 2005 7/7 bombings in London. And she was Australian of the Year in the UK. And she's got a gorgeous daughter, Amelie. And when Amelie, as a young child, used to see terrorism attacks or fires and things on the television, would get quite upset, obviously knowing that her mummy had been in a terrorist attack. And Jill would always say, look for the people that are helping. Yeah. So again, with this book, I refuse to be the negative clickbait. I want to be a lighthouse to show people that people are trying to help, but we need to be more literate and we need to ask the right questions. And our MPs need to be more educated. Like, climate change should be built into every piece of policy. It's a massive opportunity in terms of manufacturing and technology. It's a massive opportunity for Australia to take the place on the global stage to help represent what's happening here, to show people if we are the canary in the coal mine, this is coming for you.
And also an incredible economic opportunity,
massive,
right, for Australia in this space, particularly around technologies.
And carbon sinking, carbon farming, rewilding and carbon farming, absolutely huge opportunity.
Yeah. So since you finished the book, what technologies have you been exposed to that have excited you? Like what are the extra chapters that you would, and I know this is part 1. This is one 2 of 3 more books coming, right?
I've started writing the second one already. Okay. So I'm lucky enough to be part of the X Prize Global Visioneering community.
And maybe you can just tell the listeners a little bit about what X Prize is.
Yeah, so X Prize for me has been a way to tap into some of the most brilliant minds on this planet. But xprize.org, and Anusha Ansari writes the foreword for my book as well. And she's a wonderful Iranian American. She was one of the first astronauts. What do they call them? Whether you pay to go. I forgot. This is my baby brain kicking in here. She was one of the first commercial astronauts, right? Astrotourists, yeah. But she put her money where her mouth is, and now she's the CEO of the X Prize. So xprize.org, if you want to learn more, and if you want to get involved in the visioneering community, please do reach out because I can get you invited in there. There's a special code word and a special handshake that I have to. Oh yes. Would you like
yeah,
in?
I would love to.
Okay,
yeah,
we'll get you in.
Keen. Yeah.
But I want to try and get the X Prize over here for a visioneering around Australia and the Asia Pac. So X Prize create grand challenges. So the best way to describe this is the very, very first one, which actually Anusha Ansari and her family funded, which was the Ansari X Prize. It was all about commercial space travel. So what they had to do was, and the X Prize are very good at this, they ask a really tight question. You've just got to answer this really tight challenge. So it's this idea of, how do you create these levers for that gap between capability and action? How do you scale? How do you invest? How do you encourage investors? How do you become a lighthouse to new technologies and where they could go? So their thing for the Ansari suborbital space flight was you have to design an aircraft that will go up 60 kilometers upwards, come back down again with the weight of 3 people on it. So you could have a test pilot and then 2 bags of sand as far as they were concerned, or you could have 3 humans on there if you wanted to. And it had to go up and come down, and then it had to do it again within 2 weeks of that first one. So the one that won was called Galactic 1, which might start ringing bells for people because Richard Branson bought it and it became Galactic 2, which has now become Virgin Galactic. So they basically created the commercial space tourism industry. Now, people might sit here and go, well, that's no good for the environment. Look at the carbon footprint. And I'm like, I'm sorry. You need to stop and take pause. The people that are actually developing sustainable aviation fuel and the ideas of hypersonic travel, ways in which we will have carbon neutral, super fast travel. So you and I, for example, could go to Paris for lunch because the Sydney to London flight would be 2 hours on carbon neutral hypersonic aircraft. That's coming in the next 10 years. So the things that I'm really excited by are some of these tipping point technologies, as I refer, I don't even know if that's the right, I just came up with that. These tipping point technologies where, the Ocean Discovery X Prize, which I was a judge on, we had a prize pot of 7 million. But what we know is that prize pot of 7 million actually encouraged $53 million of investment into the academics, into the startups, into the businesses that were actually trying to answer that X Prize. So it's almost like you build it and they will come. And so if you have a look at the current ones are the Elon Musk Foundation's carbon reduction removal X Prize. That's $100 million looking at technologies that are going to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Any governments putting that level of money into this technology? Can we just have a look? Anyone? The eFuels X Prize, where they're looking at this sustainable aviation fuel X Prize. Now, we know that green hydrogen is a big thing for Australia, but it's not green hydrogen that I'm interested in. I'm interested in sustainable aviation fuel, being able to put in the sustainable fuel into the engines that we can't change out into electric engines. And that includes wide body aircraft and any long range aircraft. You're not going to be able to electrify those with current technology. So we need to look at alternatives because Australia, we live by our aviation, and the Pacific, we live by aviation, right? So we know that there are plans to have the first 100% sustainable aviation flight leaving Australia, going to an Asian country. And can you guess when that is planned for?
2025.
March 2023.
Wow. So last quick question is, you strike me as being an avid sci-fi reader. You've already dropped William Gibson and a few others. So what technologies that haven't been invented, and recognizing that actually one of the premises of your books is actually many of these technologies already exist, that you really want to invent. So for me, it is being able to teleport, which your hypersonic travel is giving me a lot of hope that maybe not teleportation, but something close to it. What's yours?
Well, just to add to yours too, they've just had the Avatar X Prize where it's the haptic suits with the robots because they were approached by the sponsor, ANA, the airline, to say, can you do teleportation? And it's happening on a quantum scale, but I don't think it's going to happen in humans in our generation anyway. Oh, gosh. Oh, I think something... I would like us to actually accelerate... a diversification in the way we create food. I feel like ag tech and agriculture is ripe for disruption. And I feel like we have another 2 billion mouths to feed before I pop off my clogs. And I think we're going to be in real trouble unless we advance some of that technology. If I was to go really wide and far, I'd be like, hypersonics on Earth is great, but super fast travel to other planets is going to be pretty amazing. The idea that we would have to take 5 years to travel to Mars is too long. And, do you cryogenically freeze people or sleep people the way you do in some of the science fiction movies to get them there? And it's really interesting, having some of these conversations with some of these, brilliant minds out of some of these top US universities. And one of them turned to me at the dinner. We were talking about this, how do we communicate on Mars? We'll have the avatars. There's like an 8-minute delay. And like, how would we even do that? And he just turned to me and went, it's a speed of light issue, but we'll solve it. And I'm just like, okay, so I would like to see us solve the speed of light. Yeah. If we could break the speed of light, we'd probably also get to teleportation.
We would.
So, if we look at sort of the quantum physics approaches, and we're sat here in the correct university to be having this level of conversation, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And we were to look at wormholes and we were to look at that kind of thing. Oh my gosh, that would be very exciting.
I want to talk a little bit about the vacations, staycations and space stations, which is one of the chapters that you have.
Yes.
I loved that chapter because you started by evoking what travel used to be, and it reminded me of traveling in Europe when I was 18. So I had a gap year as well.
Yep.
And, it was pre-phones.
Yes.
The internet, was in existence, but it was, an email, internet cafe. And I just
Internet
was
cafes.
free. And you were out. I carried like a Lonely Planet that was the size of a brick. You could knock someone out with it. But you weren't driven by reviews or, you took photos, but it was, I think I had a digital camera maybe. Actually, I don't even know if I did have a digital camera. Anyway, but the point is you're talking about the future of space station travel, but you're also, one thing that jumped out to me is the movement of slow vacations and slow travel and a reversion to the type of travel like mindful eating or slow food or slow reading, which I love. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, so I remember turning up, I was in Harare and in Zimbabwe, and I called my mum on the landline that was attached with a cord. And I said to her, look, I'm going to go to Mozambique for 5 days. These are the planned places that I'm going to go. This is the this is where you find them in the Lonely Planet guide. And if you don't hear from me in 5 days, then this is Uncle Rob's number and you probably want to call him and we might need to start something. I was like, my poor mother, honestly. But, she's been just an excellent support of mine, and so I turn up in Beira off the back of, so I arrive on the train in Matari and I hitchhike with this Finnish friend. Can this is like the start of a horror movie, right? So I just hitchhike with this wonderful Portuguese Mozambican woman who puts me on the bus and she says to the bus driver, these girls are sitting at the front with you. I know what you look like. I've taken your registration. I know you're looking after these girls. And I was just like, yeah, okay, I'm going to pay that forward one day. Like that was just amazing. Yeah. And then we arrive in Beira, which is this port city, and the kids are all there scrambling around, and I don't speak a word of Portuguese, but I know where it is that I want to go, and I sort of say to them, John's house, and they know all the backpackers all go to this one particular place run by an Australian British dude called John, and I give them some coins and they all, and some lollies and this, that and the other, and they run down the streets with us and walk down the streets with us holding our hands to get to John's house after a 20-minute walk, and me thinking I'm going to be led to a slaughterhouse here, but you didn't, you see, you trusted people. And I remember traveling on buses and women would literally hand me their babies. The blokes would try and give me the shake or the alcoholic drinks, right? But the women would always make good with the women, right? So the women would give me their children to hold, their chickens to hold. If I was particularly feeling unwell, they'd just be looking after me and because I was a bit hungover when I was traveling through on buses in Africa quite a lot of the time. But, I just remember turning up and trusting people and speaking to people and, not requiring anyone to tell me how to get somewhere, not seeing on Google Maps where I was going, but asking them, can you show me John's house? And
so much has been lost. I think.
My gosh.
It was it's my favorite chapter in the book actually, which is not what I expected looking at the list of things in there, because it really made me stop and think about the intentionality behind what we do. So you also talk about Industry 5.0 and Industry 5.0 being focused on purpose, which is kind of linked to this idea of intentional travel or intentional reading. Can you share a little bit about how Industry 5.0 differs from Industry 4.0?
So 4.0 really it's about 25 years old now, 30 years old now, and it's known as the Internet of Things. So for that, it's like the hypersensor thing, right? So any cameras that are on you, any smart devices you might wear. I noticed both you and I, I've taken my watch off. I was thinking I'd left my watch. Both you and I don't wear smart devices. No. And there's a number of reasons why I don't wear smart devices. And I think they're probably the same. And it's funny, whenever I put my hand up at a conference or my wrist up and go, notice the futurist is not wearing a smart device. So this is the gap that we're in now. So 4 going into 5. So the late great Shinzo Abe of Japan tried to look at the 10 years of economic doldrums that the Japanese economy had been in. And he thought, what do we know that we're really, really good at? How do we apply it to new things? A bit like how QR codes have now been used in public health and they never have been before, right? And so how do you take a technology, say, for example, in Japan, you're not allowed to have cameras on you. So we have the SoftBank Pepper robots that are used here. And I saw one at Christchurch Airport saying saying hello to people to remind them to take their laptops out of their bag as they go through security. There's cameras on that thing. So they watch you and watch around. You're not allowed to have cameras on you in Japan. So how do you have an aged care facility built so people can still live at home that have sensors everywhere, but there's no cameras? And so what you have is a smart apartment where there's a pressure pad on the floor and on the walls, and there's smart device, smart toilets, smart kettles, everything's super smart and connected. And if someone falls over and doesn't get off the floor, after 2 minutes, an alarm goes off automatically, right? So this idea of connecting up seemingly disparate technologies and putting them to use for good. And that Society 5.0 statement effectively is the way I open this chapter. So it's like, this is actually an economic imperative to take all of the sensor technology and all of the things that we know and not just use it for surveillance capitalism, but actually to look at
surveillance.
Or surveillance full stop. Yeah. And how we actually use it to allow people to have happier, healthier lives. But then we now juxtapose that with this idea of implantables. So I also do this when I speak to large audiences. I'll say, who here's got some implantable technology? And there'll be a few people with pacemakers, people with, every now and then I get someone with cochlea, people with diabetic pumps, the new fancy smart diabetes pumps. So these are implantable technologies. Because there's a medical reason, we understand them, they're acceptable to society, they're proven technologies and people like them. Then you get people like the chap in Sydney that kept putting his Transport New South Wales card in his wrist so he could Jedi wave his way through. This is the train I'm looking for, and Transport New South Wales would keep switching that off because they didn't want him to have it. And then I have Robin Williams from the ABC Science Show saying, I turned up at an ATM and it didn't take cards, but I don't have a smart device. So how do I get my money? I'm like, well, Robin, in a couple of years' time, it will be your face. And so this Internet of Things going into the Internet of Bodies is looking at how we look at implantable technologies, biometrics, and if you partner this up with Web3, when we look at this idea of how do we keep cyber secure profiles and trust of identification on the internet going forwards as well, it's going to be the Internet of Bodies that does this for us. The way you type your password is your password. The inflection in your voice, your iris fingerprint, even your heartbeat can be registered through your devices. And your heartbeat is as unique to you as your fingerprint is. We have to build in layers of biometric identification because otherwise we're just going to have cybersecurity attacks at 100 points of ID that are just going to keep wiping everybody out.
Yeah.
So for me, the Internet of Bodies is 5.0. It's taking that technology, applying it to human problems and helping people with diseases, helping people with disabilities, helping people who want to improve their lives. And a really great example is like the exoskeleton. So something that's come out of defence that can then be employed in, say, healthcare or in factories. And, if you can't solve it by removing the human, you put the human in the robot or the robot in the human in terms of how we look at how we're going to be manufacturing and working with an ageing population going forwards. I saw this wonderful, Grandad was obviously out with the family trip at, I think it was Sea Life Centre in Mooloolaba in Sunshine Coast a few weeks ago. And he was there pushing one of those things around, bent over, pushing one of those things around, and I looked at him and I was like, why isn't he wearing an exoskeleton? Because we will be. By the time we're aging, we will have exoskeletons that will be helping us walk upright. We won't be pushing things along. And that's the speed at which this technology is now going.
And for listeners, an exoskeleton is essentially you strap it on and it gives you additional strength. So, you don't quite become Hulk, but the idea is that
you can lift 120 kilos. Yeah. But there's also different ones. So you can have it for individual digits. You can have it for individual limbs. And the wonderful Kurt Carson, whose team invented Siri, for example, he was looking at working with kids with cerebral palsy, where you literally pulled it on like I've got my skinny jeans on today. Like you literally just pulled it onto you and that clothing was your smart device. And that's convergence.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And it really is an example of a very positive use of technology. I think some of the examples you've given probably are, taking people down, how can that be misused or abused? So let's talk a little bit about the concept of digital twins. What is a digital twin? But also, as we are having more and more data and information available out there, how do we ensure that it's actually being protected, that we have consent over use of that data? And I thought you had some interesting insight in the book on that as well.
Well, I hate to knock this on the head, but in Australia, we don't have consent over where our data goes anymore. We have
if we ever did.
Well, I'd like, The Matrix does choose 1998 as the peak of human civilization, doesn't it? So it's like
what happened in
the flip phone, that was Keanu.
Yeah.
I tell you, any chance to see Keanu Reeves in that film, I always take it. The big problem here is, and the wonderful Professor Leslie Seebeck, who is still attached to ANU, she was involved in the Cybersecurity Institute here.
She is excellent.
She is somebody to follow on this.
Yes.
Some of her thoughts around this are just, she says some things to me sometimes that stop me. It's very rare I find people like that, but when I do, I just need them as my friends. And, she sort of said to me, Catherine, look, a lot of people think we've got no privacy and so we just let it go. But like I say in my book, we don't. We fight for everything we've got left. Because right now there are digital copies of you that are chimeric, that are sitting inside data amalgamation companies, probably in the US and various other countries. And what they're doing is they're creating digital twins of you that they then use to sell to people. Now, the problem here is that you didn't consent for anything of this nature to happen, except you did when you downloaded the app. If it was free, you are the product.
Meaningful consent is key here.
Meaningful and educated consent. And then also how that goes internationally. And we know that there are some social media companies that are based particularly north of here who've already admitted that they have broken the rules that they said they were going to do around how their information is being shared. And whenever I have a friend that says, I'm on TikTok and I do my dance with my girls, I'm like, you do realise what you're doing? She's like, what? It's just a video. I'm like, no, you are showing all the points of entry into your living room. You are giving away all of the socioeconomic information about your life with all the snacks and the bottles and the shoes and the clothes that you wear. You're giving away all of the information around your biometrics, looking at potential gait analysis to pick up neurodegenerative diseases. Maybe it will pick up autism spectrum in your kids. Not that that's a bad thing, by the way. I don't say that as a weaponized term, but people do like to weaponize neurodivergent, and I don't agree with that. But people can be used to pick up neurodivergent trends in populations. Now imagine these cameras are pointed at a primary school. I mean, we used to have people that would go and pick up, this person's going to be a good runner, a good swimmer, and we used to think about stories that would come from north of here again around how there'd be scouts that would go out and pick out kids that might have biophysical traits that would allow them to be, the best ballet dancer, for example. And then they get stuck in that stream of you will be the best ballet dancer. Imagine now we've got that in our primary schools and we're selling that data because it's a CCTV camera that's attached to a shopping centre that's next to the primary school that watches the kids walk past it every day. Who's consenting to that?
Yeah.
We are, because we've got nothing against it. And it's almost like if we should have it such that they can't take it unless we've approved it, rather than they can take it because we haven't said no. And there's a huge argument around consent with this, because here's my question back to you, and this is the thing that you chew on all the time, right? Is if there's a digital twin of me that's making money for somebody somewhere, what happens if I die? My digital twin is still going to make money for someone, even though I'm dead. So I don't even have the right to a digital death anymore. And that's scary, because my digital being will exist somewhere without my consent. And that's here and now. That's not even futurism.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people in terms of when you pass away, who has control over your social media accounts, these types of things, a few people are starting to think about that in terms of their death planning, but very few people are thinking about the questions that you're putting forward in terms of that use. But also there's lots of interesting technologies now that are looking at, well, do you want to have, if you can take your WhatsApp messages of your loved one and create a bot that's going to speak back to you, is that something that you would want if they pass away? So there's all sorts of really challenging questions about that. There's a great book called The Startup Wife, which is a fiction, and it is like just a ripping read, which sits around that question. You spoke a little bit about identifying sports people, and one of the chapters on your book talks about the future of sport. The most striking bit about that for me was that you predict that we will either have the end of professional sport, or we will have everybody basically doping, because that's just the future of sport. And that was a pretty stark contrast for me. So any comment you have on that, but also you make the claim that we need to champion science and scientists in the same way that we champion sports people. Couldn't agree with you more, but my question is, how do we get there? How do we actually transition and make that change?
Okay, so I mean, I take a lot of personal flack because I get on the cover of Company Director magazine and some people don't like it. I take a lot of flack when I've won business awards. Tall poppy syndrome in this country is keeping a lot of really great scientists and engineers down because, if you stand up too tall, I've got a beautiful armoury at home for all the knives that were stabbed in my back, Luckily, I've got to that age where I don't care anymore. But also I've got a really good network of supporters around me, so I don't feel alone in this. So until we start actually celebrating people that have science and technology success, and I don't just mean the Eureka Prizes, which are a wonderful set of prizes, they never get on the front page of any of the major magazines, do they? Are they like front and center of the news and the media that we see? It's like whenever I show people a picture of, Kim Kardashian and Elizabeth Blackburn, and I say to them, can you name these women? And everyone knows Kim Kardashian and no one knows Elizabeth Blackburn, our only Australian individual Nobel Prize winner who discovered, the work of telomeres in terms of our genetic aging and our chronotypes, and basically, helped us link things like domestic violence and cancer, through our telomeres. And so we can't even celebrate the people that we know are successful. What is wrong with us? And I say this as an Australian citizen. And yes, I know I'm a new Australian citizen, but I watch the society that my 2-year-old, now 3-year-old, and 4 going on 5-year-old are growing up in. And in the US, whenever I go there, all of the things that I've done are championed. Everyone is so amazing. They all support each other. They rally around each other. I'm not saying that culture's perfect, but there's more of a celebration of people like Tim Cook, Steve Jobs, these kinds of people. They are elevated up because they're tech gurus, right? And they're smart. Warren Buffett, their intelligence is something that we rank them by. But in Australia, if someone sticks their head up too far, we're just going to chop it off because we've just got to scrape by. Don't stick your head up, right? So until we start recognizing that the value to our economy of our science, technology, engineering, and maths is worth more than the sports economy, then we're never really going to wake up, right? Like when we look at all of the jobs that are coming, they're not jobs in sport, they're jobs in tech. So we need to start celebrating STEM the way we celebrate sports, because I think it would be nothing but good. I don't see how that would detract from anything else either. It's not like you have to choose, do we choose sports or science? We can celebrate both.
Yeah.
There's enough opportunity to celebrate both and enough opportunity to talk about both. And when we look at all of the exciting new jobs coming both in the movie industry, in the sports industry, in any of the resources, in any of the technologies that are fighting climate change, in politics, in academia, all of the new and exciting spaces are going to have STEM related to it somewhere. 3D visual artists. I mean, Peter Jackson just sold Weta, where they made The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. 2.4 billion Australian to an American games company. Why? Because they're building the metaverse. And so we sit here clicking on clickbait on social media, but we don't.
Losing 40 days a year.
40 days a year.
Which was one of the stats in your book that comes to me every time I start scrolling.
Yeah.
I'm like, stop it.
Stop it right now.
All right. So we're nearly at time. 2 final questions. Converge is a trilogy. What's coming next? And why are you writing these books? Because I think you speak very eloquently about your children and the motivation there. So I think it's useful for listeners to hear that.
I think I looked for inspiration and all I found was white male American men with an F-bomb in the cover of their book. And I was like, whenever you walk into a bookshop off the high street, typically, or in the airport, it's very rare to find women's voices in the top 50, Australians' women's voices that aren't either sports stars or Leanne Moriarty. And of course, she's done a great job. Or people with biographies who are politicians or connected to the sort of like that kind of, where are the voices of Australians inside the way we imbibe knowledge? And so part of me did this because I'm a little bit belligerent, as I describe about my granddad Gordon, in the War with No Dead chapter, in that I wanted to test the system. Now, this particular book I wrote over 20 nights between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m.
It's just crazy.
I dumped it out, and then I had a science editor helping me fact check everything that my memory hadn't completely gone. And then I had a structural editor, and it took me 6 months to land a publisher. None of the large publishers would touch me with a barge pole because I didn't have 1 million followers and I wasn't on the ABC all the time. And I found a woman-owned Australian publishing house to publish me, Leslie at Major Street Publications. And I was like, okay, Leslie, this is a test. So let's see what we need to do to make this book a success. And it's now a bestseller, technically. Thank you so much.
We celebrate success.
Yes, we do. We've got to get better at saying thank you to it as well, right? When people do, because we are humbled enough to say, oh, no. Actually, no, thank you. Yeah. It's been my first work, but I have to say it's not my best. I did it because I needed to get it out of my brain onto paper. And everything is intentional, from the cover design to the text that's chosen, to the way I wrote the chapters, to the way we summarize the chapters. And my wonderful editing team turned the geek into the chic and allowed it to become a more approachable text than the first thing that I dumped out of my brain in those 3 weeks. I actually made myself ill dumping that stuff out, but I had to get it out of my head because I've been saying that I was going to do this for years. It's effectively 5 years worth of research and speaking work combined into one book. So, I mean, it's not just come out of nowhere. It has been a labour of love over the years. So now what I've done is I've tried to look at what are the structures that are in place that stop diverse Australian voices getting published. And so you know me, I'm a bit of a geek, right? So the whole thing in itself has been an exercise of trying to work out where we need to play the system and where we need the levers and where we need to jockey things. And so whenever I present now at large conferences and I've got the books there for sale, I say to people, everyone in this room always likes to say, yes, diversity in STEM, women in STEM. Now, whenever anyone says that to me going forwards, I'm going to say to them, so how many copies of my book did you buy? Because if you can't put your money where your mouth is, I don't believe you. And the thing is, if we don't make this a success, regardless of the fact that my name's on the front of it, then it's going to put off anyone else backing any other woman in STEM. So I said to Leslie, my publisher, I was like, we have a fight here that this, and I will do everything in my power possible to make this a global success. And we need to unleash every weapon we possibly have to try and fight against the big publishers that are completely drowning out Australian voices with all of these American books that come in here. Now, I'm not saying they're not worth reading, of course, but why is it we don't have Australians in the top 10 of our books? Why don't we have women in our top 50? And so anyway, you can see I was a bit like, right, okay, we've got to try and undo some of the systems and structures that are around this. And so, yeah, it will continue on. We're doing our UK and our US launches. And I hope that I become a Sunday Times bestseller and a New York Times bestseller. It's already had an excerpt in the Australian, which was very well received. And some of the comments were so interesting and not abusive at all, which was quite exciting.
The fact we have to say that, though, is
I know, never
alarming.
read the comments, except I do read the comments. They're quite a good pulse check for people. But yeah, so that's why I did this book, was because I feel like as a country, our level of STEM literacy and tech literacy could only be improved. And I think when we look back at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone started questioning some of the things that we know to be irrefutably true around public health measures and vaccines, and people didn't understand the difference between a protein vaccine, a PCR machine, and an mRNA vaccine, which of course is language that those of us that are in academia are all familiar with. I didn't take that as a success from academia. I took that as a failing. I was like, how is it as universities, one of our remits is to enable society to be better able to make decisions on the knowledge that they have from the fact that we exist. And so that's been a failing in us disseminating that information. So other than starting a TikTok channel or trying to get into someone's social media that's probably too young, how do we get to the average housewife in Toowoomba? How do I talk to the grandparents of the kid that might be wanting to study science, but the grandparents are looking at her and saying, oh, it's not for you, love, it's a man's world. You know, how do we augment all of the work that's gone down into improving our economy and look at the opportunities through technology if people don't get the basics that are in this book? And again, that's not to sound ivory tower. It's a failing that as academics, we haven't managed to do this already. And so this is my first attempt to poke the bear in the ribs to see what is it that works. The thing about this book and the book sales, that's one thing. The fact is that we've got the federal government minister, Ed Husic, has bought a copy. I mean, I did send them all copies, but they obviously get lost in their teams or whatever. He bought a copy when it was in pre-sale on Booktopia. He's read the entire thing and he's now quoting it in his speeches. Now, I'm sorry. Should I have spent my time writing publications that 5 people might refer to? Or do I spend my energy as a new generation academic in educating society
and having real world impact,
but also learning and listening from the people that I'm trying to communicate with at the same time. And so, you know, conversation is the thing that starts innovation. And the scale gap between capability and action is about education as much as it is about investment.
Absolutely. So, Catherine, in your book, one of the particular things that I like about it is you end each chapter with getting back in the driver's seat, and you have really useful resources, practical suggestions for people to do. So I encourage everyone to check that out. The final question that we ask everyone is, what do you recommend people read? Like, what have you found useful for people who are interested in these subjects? Obviously, we're recommending the book, but you know, what resources are your go-to?
If you said to me, you've got an hour to spend on a particular subject, the first place I would go is TED. Because I feel like if you want to, and the thing I loved about TED, and you can go to TED.com, and in there's a filter where you can put in how much time you have and what subject you want to learn about. Yeah. And they find you recommendations of TED Talks. And so I had to put something very quickly together around the future of work. And so I needed to access I didn't want to sit and read. It was late at night and I didn't want to sit and read, a 100-page document from Boston Consulting Group or from Deloitte or from someone like that. I just wanted the quick and dirty. Give me the summary. I wanted to see the person talk about something with passion, and I wanted to see their eyes light up when they talked about it. Yeah. And so I went to TED. And so we've obviously got some great successes with our own academics here. I mean, Genevieve, who I mentioned earlier, I think her TED Talks had over 2 million views now.
And it's a great TED Talk.
It's an amazing TED Talk. Yeah. Highly recommend it. And
on the ethics of AI.
If you haven't watched Genevieve Bell's TED Talk, in fact, she's got more than one, but if you haven't watched that particular one, that's my first go-to around anything around humans and technology. But that's been a huge source, not only then of finding the individuals that are the best in the business, but those that can put it into 18 minutes or fewer. Yeah. Because if you can't put what you love and study and work on into 18 minutes or fewer, then you really don't know what you're talking about. So I feel like that TED model has been grown so successfully over the last couple of decades that would be my first resource. Yeah.
Well, look, you speak about people who have passion and whose eyes light up, and that's definitely the case with you. So thank you so much for coming on Tech Mirror. For our listeners, this is actually the last podcast of the year. So we wish you all a wonderful Christmas break. Hope you have some downtime and some well-earned rest, and we'll be back in the new year. Thank you very much. Tech Mirror is a podcast of the Tech Policy Design Centre at the Australian National University. This episode was produced on Ngunnawal lands by Jack Fox. If you would like to support the pod, please give us a 5-star rating, or even better, leave us a short review. This really helps us to get the word out. We also love it when you send us questions or comments. We read them all. You can find out more by following us on Tech Policy Design on Twitter or LinkedIn, or Google Tech Policy Design Centre and follow the links. Thanks for listening. Get in touch and get involved.